Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Min Son Hee with our group of foreign journalists. Welcome to the show. So we are here in Dream Forest, Pondong in Seoul. Have you been here before, Frank?
I don't think I've been here before. It is really beautiful today. Springtime in South Korea is really quite nice, and we've seen in the last week, I guess, the cherry blossoms come out, and you can see some of these here today, and I think I'll bring my family back for a picnic sometime.
Right. Well, it's been another week of many events here in Korea. What, Don, are some of the stories that caught your attention?
Well, of course, I'm most impressed by this so-called American Armada that's on its way to the waters off South Korea, probably here by now. That's an extremely sort of bold gesture on the part of President Trump.
Right. Eva, what are some of the stories that caught your attention?
Well, I think the summit that we will talk about today was a major event, the attack on Syria also, and as Don just said, now the situation between North Korea and the United States, we all have our eyes on it.
Right. Frank?
Yes, I've been following the story of what's going on with the South Korean election and campaign process as it seems to be a tightening race for the presidency of South Korea, with Ahn Cheol-soo now just 5 percentage points away from the frontrunner Moon Jae-in.
Right. Earlier this month, the leaders of China and the United States held their first summit talks. In this edition of Foreign Correspondents, we delve into details of that meeting and more.
For the first time under the Trump administration, the US and China held summit talks on April 6th and 7th. Both countries shared their understanding about the growing risk that North Korea poses with its nuclear weapons program, one of the key agendas for the summit. But in terms of approaches, Washington is said to have pushed for stronger pressure, while Beijing is believed to have advocated for dialogue.
They discussed the challenges that introduces for both countries, but there's a real commitment that we work together to see if this cannot be resolved in a peaceful way.
The two sides also announced plans for 100-day trade talks to resolve their trade imbalance. The aim is to increase US exports to China and reduce its trade deficit. But it's unknown whether the issues of Seoul's deployment of the US missile defense system THAAD and tensions in the South China Sea were discussed during the meeting.
I think we have made tremendous progress in our relationship with China. My representatives have been meeting one-on-one with their counterparts from China.
对于这个中美关系未来发展呢，具有特殊重要的意义。这个特朗普总统为我和我的代表团呢做了一个非常好的安排。
The overall response to the summit meeting was mixed. China's state-run Xinhua news agency said the two sides agreed to narrow their differences based on mutual respect and enhance their understanding of each other in a constructive manner. China's Global Times said the meeting would help create momentum for the complex relations between the two countries. Meanwhile, Bloomberg said the biggest accomplishment from the summit was the two leaders getting to know one another. USA Today pointed out both leaders acknowledged that North Korea had reached a serious stage in its nuclear development, but failed to find a breakthrough in how to deal with the situation. A vast array of topics were covered by President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping during their historic meeting. We sit down now to take a closer look at some of the issues discussed.
Let's begin with your thoughts on the talks between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. How do you assess the first summit, Frank?
These summits between leaders of states, I think, really are symbolic. And what came out of this was, I think, a pretty positive outcome, considering the sort of antagonistic relationship that exists between China and the United States, especially since Donald Trump became president. So I think that sort of antagonism might have been softened through this meeting and some time spent together with the two leaders. Although there still are some structural problems in that relationship, especially with regards to trade, that they seem to be trying to address. But the summit certainly isn't a venue where they're going to iron out any of those details. We'll have to wait and see just how relations between China and the United States pan out in the future, especially on the contentious trade issue.
I see. Eva, perhaps one of the more tangible gains from the summit talks is the 100-day trade talks that they are scheduled to start. This is aimed at talking about the trade imbalance between America and China. What are your thoughts on that?
From what I understand from world economy, you cannot change easily a trade imbalance, and such a big trade imbalance. So I'm not very positive that this measure will actually have a big effect. I think we'll have to wait and see. China did say that they were ready to open their economy. Now, what that concretely means, we have to wait.
Right, because Washington hopes to expand its exports to China and perhaps reduce the trade deficit, right?
Well,
Don?
of course, yes. And of course, that was a big issue during the campaign. Donald Trump, as a candidate, was saying that he would take action against China, quite severe action, protective tariffs and that kind of thing. So I think that this, the promise of trade talks over, I think, a 100-day period sort of thing, I think that heads off an immediate action by the United States. And I think that there may be some gestures on the part of China to keep the dialogue going and to sort of dissuade Trump from some precipitous action that might really be quite severe and sort of really mess up the U.S. China relationship. But I'm not expecting an awful lot from these trade talks. I'm not expecting the trade imbalance to change seriously. I think that they're going to try to put off action that might be regarded as almost hostile. They're trying to put off protective tariffs.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Don there. There's some structural, realities in the trade imbalance between the U.S. and China. Labor is much cheaper in China. They can produce products much cheaper than they can produce them in the United States. And so adjusting the trade imbalance would require tariffs, and then there would be kind of a trade war between the two countries that wouldn't benefit either party.
Right. Contrary to expectations, the issue of THAAD was not discussed in detail during the summit. Frank, where does this leave South Korea?
I don't think that it's something that could have been really addressed in the summit. The same with the North Korea issue. Not something that they want to be talking about in their first meeting, and something maybe left for other officials, ambassadors and envoys here in the region to iron out the details of any sort of coordinated policies or strategies toward North Korea, and any sort of agreement or coordination or compensation, let's say, on THAAD. That's going to be a very thorny issue here for South Korea, and to get the American president to bring that up with Xi Jinping, I think is kind of unrealistic. The fact that they came out of this without some sort of, major crisis in the relationship, and without some sort of argument or anything like that, I think we need to view as a positive, because, again, the relationship between the two countries is so sort of antagonistic leading into this. There are some serious issues that need to be dealt with between the two states, and managing maybe to avoid that, to push that into the back rooms, might be a good thing at this time.
Right, and only time will tell. Now, indeed, summit talks between the two leaders from China and the United States were overshadowed, like Eva pointed out, by U.S. missile strikes against a Syrian base in response to a chemical weapon assault against civilians there. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson also claimed the attacks were a message to any nation operating outside international norms, and many interpreting this as a message to North Korea.
On the first day of the highly anticipated U.S. China summit, Washington launched a missile attack against Syria. At around 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on April 6th, 59 missiles from U.S. warships in the Mediterranean Sea struck a Syrian airbase. The assault was an act of retaliation against the Syrian government, which is believed to have used chemical weapons against rebel groups in the country.
The sight of people being gassed and blown away by barrel bombs ensures that if we see this kind of action again, we hold open the possibility of future action.
The attack was mostly well received. U.S. allies such as the UK, France and Japan expressed their support, while the American public has, for the most part, shown a positive response.
The United States took a very measured step last night. We are prepared to do more, but we hope that will not be necessary.
But the timing of the attack did raise some questions. Many saw the decision to launch an assault during the U.S. China summit as a warning to Pyongyang and Beijing. In an interview with ABC News, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the attack carries a message for any nation operating outside of international norms, indirectly pointing to North Korea. Meanwhile, following the U.S. China summit and Washington's attack on Syria, tensions have been mounting on the Korean Peninsula. Social media has been dominated by rampant rumors about an impending April crisis, Trump possibly bombing North Korea, and potential exile plans for Kim Jong-un. But Seoul has denied the possibility of the U.S. launching a preemptive strike against North Korea.
일각에서 우려하는 미국의 선제 타격론이라든지 이런 것들은 크게 우려하실 필요는 없을 것으로 생각을 합니다.
The Defense Ministry has also called on the public not to be swayed by rumors spreading online.
최근 SNS 등에서 유포되고 있는 한반도 안보 상황에 대한 과장된 평가에 대해서 현혹되지 않도록 주의가 필요하다는 점을 당부를 드립니다.
Concerns about clashing geopolitical interests surrounding the Korean Peninsula have been on the rise, but a clear answer to these issues has yet to be put forward.
Let's now talk about the timing of the attack against Syria. Frank, does it hold any significance?
Absolutely, for what happened there and the pictures that were transmitted around the world of the civilian deaths as a result of the chemical attack. And a lot of people have said, this is a justifiable response by the United States because of that chemical attack. However, I feel that a long-range strategy in terms of Syria to deflate that conflict is necessary, and a one-off attack response to something the Syrian government does is not going to forward a long-term solution to that conflict. The sides need to be encouraged to sit down and negotiate their way out of this. I do think it has some relevance also on what's going on here in South Korea with as Trump puts it, the Armada of ships led by the Carl Vinson coming here to South Korea and to put more pressure on North Korea. I think that the timing of that and in relation with the Syrian strike is somewhat significant for sure.
Right. Was it ever a warning to North Korea, do you think, the attacks against Syria?
I think it was. I think it was not only. I think this attack had several purposes. Of course, it was a message to Assad. It was a message to the world that Donald Trump wants to show himself as a strong man who can act quickly, who can not only talk but also attack. It was a message to the people who have been criticizing him for being too close to Russia and Putin. And it was a message to China and indirectly to North Korea. And he said it afterwards. He said we could do the same in North Korea with or without China.
Don, in recent days the word war has been common in the media here. Have you feared the possibility of such confrontations while being stationed in South Korea. Have you ever worried about war breaking out in the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I've thought about war breaking out on the Korean Peninsula, a second Korean war, but I don't really worry about it. You know, it just seems so far-fetched. It just doesn't seem like it's going to happen, you know. We've had so many crises. Remember in August of nearly 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, there was that crisis on the DMZ where there was a fear of shots being exchanged after the two South Korean army sergeants were severely wounded, lost legs and so forth due to a North Korean mine. You know, we almost saw the two sides coming to blows then. Now it would seem that it may be more serious with this Armada, this U.S. Armada off the coast, and North Korea talking about developing a missile that can carry a nuclear warhead to Washington. It would seem more serious, but there's a sense here that, oh, this will blow over like all those other crises. Well, maybe it will, probably it will, but maybe someday it will not blow over, and maybe we will see catastrophe, crisis, a second Korean war. But I don't think that it's happening now. I don't think it's coming now. I think about that, but I'm not worried about it.
I see. What about you, Frank? What are the chances?
Well, I'm pretty much in the same boat as Don, and I worry that perhaps some of the hawks here in South Korea might be right, that Don and I, and perhaps much of the South Korean public, is desensitized to the risk of conflict on the Korean Peninsula. And one of the things that sort of elevates this risk is the movement of troops and movement of more military assets to the region that puts more pressure on North Korea, reduces the amount of time maybe to respond to different actions by different sides. And I think that in itself inflates the chances of some error in judgment to be made. I think that's really the biggest risk. Not that one side or the other will purposely attack and retaliation will escalate, but that there will be an error in judgment that will set off a chain of the events that might, you know, spiral out of control. I don't think that's going to happen. I think a lot of this is really negotiations by other means. As you could say.
Right.
I think we all have this experience of family or friends outside of Korea worrying more than we do here, and I think South Koreans, the general public, usually doesn't worry. I might say most of them don't care about what is happening north of the DMZ, and I think we can understand when we live here and it's been more than 60 years of separation and you have to go on and live your life. That said, I've heard that recently on the social networks, some South Koreans were expressing some worries, not about North Korea, but actually from the unpredictability of the new American president, saying so far we knew that there was this strategy and this cycle, but here we cannot predict what Donald Trump will do, and I think that's a new source of worry.
You hear a lot of talk about preemptive strike. Maybe Donald Trump has a preemptive strike in mind, but it's not clear. What would he strike out? Okay, the North Korean missile sites, the North Korean nuclear test site, the North Korean complex at Yongbyon. You know, there's a lot of loose talk like this. Koreans also talk about preemptive strike. Extremists on the right say a preemptive strike would be a great idea. I don't think most people want a preemptive strike. In fact, I think most people think a preemptive strike would be a very bad idea because it could lead to sudden escalation of the conflict in which millions of lives would be at risk.
What, though, are the chances of the Trump administration launching a preemptive strike, do you think? I
would not rule out the possibility, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think that they really are going to do a preemptive strike. I don't think that's, they may hold that out as an option. In the range of options, that may be an option, but I don't think it's an option that they're going to choose at this stage. Now, maybe if North Korea does launch an intercontinental ballistic missile, even on a test basis, maybe there will be a preemptive strike. But North Korea is not going to do that right away. So we don't know what will happen. But North Korea is supposedly planning a 6th nuclear test. That will really raise some questions. Right. That will get a lot of attention, as it always has the previous 5 nuclear tests. But then again, how do you do a preemptive strike against an underground nuclear test site? And if they do the test, what are you going to do? Then bomb the site again or send cruise missiles in? I don't think that that's going to be an option either. I think there'll be an awful lot of talking, an awful lot of speech making in the UN, an awful lot of denunciations and criticism, maybe movement of that armada somewhere, and maybe some overflights perhaps. But I don't think, even if there's a 6th nuclear test, I don't think that we're going to have a preemptive strike.
I agree with Don here. I don't think that really the U.S. administration has thought this all the way through. Bringing that armada back, so-called armada back, heightens the level of tension. But if North Korea follows through with, a nuclear test or does an ICBM test, which I find unlikely at this point, I agree with Don on that, the U.S. is in a position where it either has to escalate extraordinarily and provocatively and quite dangerously, or essentially back down, or wait. Are they going to leave that armada out there waiting for North Korea to do a nuclear test or a missile test? In particular, it might be reasonable for, or arguably reasonable for the U.S. to shoot down a missile test, an ICBM missile test that might be flying over Japan or something like that. That might be a reasonable response to which North Korea would not escalate the situation with some asymmetrical attack on South Korea. But other than that, that armada sort of has to sit there and wait for North Korea to do something, and I just don't think North Korea is going to do anything. It might do a nuclear test, but not a missile launch with, again, those warships, the Carl Vinson Strike Group, sitting in the East Sea. Right. And so they're left waiting and kind of, maybe eventually we'll see a drawdown of tension, perhaps over the summertime.
Right. American broadcasting station NBC provided live coverage of the events here in Korea. Journalist Lester Holt, I think, had an interview with Tae Yong-ho, the former deputy ambassador to the UK, the North Korean defector here. Koreans here in South Korea believe that such attention is indication of the severity of the situation on the peninsula. What are your thoughts, Frank?
Well, again, I'll get back to the sort of media spin that happens here, that we've all sort of felt with friends and family calling us and asking us if we're okay if there's going to be a war. And the media kind of acts like a pack, when it comes to these types of issues and this sort of increase in tension on the Korean Peninsula. And that's what you've seen with what we call parachute journalists coming in. That's when the media is really capitalizing on a certain issue, is when you see people that are not stationed in South Korea move here, as they did a year and a half ago when we had that other tension surrounding the mine incident. Right. When that happened, you had a lot of foreign journalists coming to South Korea to do reporting, and it doesn't necessarily reflect accurately the level of tension here or the possibility of war. It just reflects. It creates it. It does. It creates it, and it generates more sort of clickbait and profits and attention for those media organizations.
Right. Now, so we talked about the summit talks between China and the U.S. that took place earlier this month, and about tensions here on the Korean Peninsula. Frank, before we go, how do you assess today's discussion?
I thought it was good. It's nice to have a little bit more. I think we had a little bit more back and forth today on the issues, and I think it's important to get some other perspectives that you might not see in the press all the time about these international affairs that are related. From the U.S. to Syria to here to South Korea. It's important to put some context behind these issues. Right.
Eva, what about you? It's been a while since we saw you.
Yes. I think what's interesting is that we were supposed to talk about the U.S. China summit, and then we see that we cannot talk about that without talking about many other issues. So that shows us that how the world is globalized. That's interesting. My second thought would be, I feel a bit sorry that for so many issues, it's unpredictable, and then the answer is we don't know. We'll have to see, and unfortunately we can't read the future yet.
Right, Don.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, incredibly. I think we've covered the waterfront, so to speak, from the Trump-Xi summit to the U.S. Armada off the coast to the military exercises to the coverage of North Korea. So I think we pretty well covered it on this gorgeous spring day. I'm looking out on all these beautiful flowering cherry trees what a day and what a discussion. Very, very, very helpful.
Yes, definitely. Well, peace cannot be kept by force. It can all be achieved by understanding. These words by Albert Einstein speak volumes about the importance of dialogue and cooperation in ensuring peace and stability worldwide. Thank you for watching.